Hello guys, how are you all doing? So today we are gonna see, what if Luffy and Trafalgar Law were childhood friends? Part 1, so let's begin the video. Hey, did you see the boy who lives on the other street? Luffy looks at the boy who's talking to him, confused about who he was talking about. He was new there, having recently moved to live with a woman named Dating, who now would be his adoptive mother, and Ace, the boy who also lived there, and didn't seem to like him very much, no matter how much he tried to be nice and friendly with him. He always felt alone in that place, and there was nothing he hated more than to feel that way. So, whenever he could, he would run away from home and go to play in the streets, where he had already made an amazing number of friends in the few days he had moved there. Boy who lives on the other street. Who's that? Luffy questioned, wanting to know more about this boy. It's that strange boy who lives nearby. He's very strange, never going out of his house for anything. But of course he doesn't come out, he's sick. Didn't you see those strange white spots that he has in his body? They say that if you touch them, you get sick too. Isn't that scary, the other boy said, talking about the rumors he had heard from the other boys in the neighborhood. Luffy looked at them, still confused on the subject. Getting sick when approaching someone may seem scary to others, but to Luffy that fact only increased his curiosity about this kid. Where does he live? He asks the boys, they then give him strange looks. Why do you want to know? Don't tell me you want to go there. Yes I do. Tell me where he lives. He insisted, sounding like he was going for a great adventure, not a place that looks so dangerous in the other boy's eyes. He lives in the second house down the street. But if I were you I wouldn't go there. He warned, but Luffy seemed not to hear anything he had said, running to the place, more curious than ever to see this strange boy whom everyone talked about. Luffy ran as fast as he could, anxious, but getting there he was somewhat disappointed, since the walls of the house were too high, and he couldn't see anything. But that was nothing he couldn't solve. In his own clumsy way, he managed to climb the wall of the house, finally being able to see inside. Looking to the window, he could see someone in front of it, a boy who had several white spots in his body, just like the street boys had described. But it wasn't these white spots that really caught his attention. What really caught his attention was the expression on the boy's face. He looked so sad and lonely. Luffy knew these two feelings very well, and knew they were not good. Without thinking much, he picked up a small rock in the wall where he was, and then threw it in the window, hoping that the glass would not break. He gave a big smile when he realized he had managed to call the boy's attention without doing any damage. He called out the boy, trying to get in touch with him. When the boy went to open the window, he smiled in satisfaction. Who are you? What do you want here? The boy asked, in a tone that wasn't very friendly. But that wasn't anything that would frighten Luffy, or make him leave the place. I'm Luffy. What's your name? He asked, excited to meet someone new, so excited that he had even forgotten the rumors that surrounded the boy. Why would I say my name to a stranger? What do you want here? He repeated the same question as before, with the same threatening tone, and Luffy started getting somewhat irritated with the boy. He wanted answers, and not more questions to answer. Things weren't fun like this. This isn't fun. I was curious to see you ever since everyone on the street told me about you. He said, and the other boy began to look at him with a suspect, and more menacing look than before. You've come to laugh at me then? He asked, and Luffy shook his head immediately, denying that this was true. He hadn't come to laugh at anyone, he was just curious to know the boy who everyone talked about. No? I just wanted to meet you. You look lonely, wanna be my friend? Luffy said, giving a big smile to him, as the boy looked at him in surprise, as if the other boy was crazy. Stop kidding me. I don't want to be your friend, now go away. He replied, closing the window, and going out of sight. Luffy stared at the closed window, wondering if he had said something to the other boy that had offended him. Not finding an answer to that, he went down the wall, and walked away, but not giving up in making that boy his friend. Luffy wasn't a person to give up so easily. Day after day he found himself once again going up the walls of the boy's house, and throwing rocks at his window to draw his attention, not caring if the boys were on the street or even dating, and Ace said to him to stay away from the boy. He insisted every day until the boy finally decided to open the window of his house, and talk to him again. Don't you ever get tired? He asked Luffy, the latter giving a little laugh, as if all this was a great adventure, and a challenge for him. No? I won't give up until you become my friend. He said, determined, prepared to insist on the time it took to gain the attention and friendship of the other boy. People haven't told you that if you get close to me you will get sick? The other boy asked, curious. It was clear that Luffy had heard these rumors, but he didn't believe them, or at least didn't care about them. Yes, they told me about that, but I don't care, this won't stop me from being your friend. Luffy said simply, leaving the other boy surprised and speechless. You feel lonely, don't you? Luffy asked, and then the other boy looked at him, tears filling his eyes without him noticing. He shook his head in agreement with the other boy, unable to say a word. Then be my friend. Then you won't ever be alone again. He answered, the other finally agreeing with him. My name is Trafalgar Law. The boy finally revealed his name as proof that he had become his friend, and Luffy gave the biggest smile he had ever seen in his life. Okay, try it, Trafalgar. We will be friends from now on. Luffy said, and Law gave a small laugh as the other couldn't speak his name. From that day on everything changed between them, and every day Luffy appeared in the same place when climbing the wall of his house. They then spent the day talking and playing, each on their side. In these days he discovered several things about the boy, like his disease wasn't contagious as everyone said, but when he said that to the boys from the street where he lived no one believed him. A few more days went by, and he found himself no longer needing to climb up the walls of the boy's house, now entering through the front door. Law had told his parents about this strange boy who appeared every day in his window, insisting on having his friendship, and they were very happy to find someone who finally didn't discriminate against their child because of his illness. From that day on he had free access to the Trafalgar family home, knowing his parents, who Luffy had found amazing, and also his little sister, who like him, had the same white marks on her body. Rather than remain in the streets as before, Luffy spent his days in Law's home, the other kids distancing themselves from him, as he was in constant contact with the sick boy. "You don't mind everyone turning away from you because of me?" Law questioned Luffy, feeling guilty. Luffy just shook his head in denial. He didn't care about any of those boys. Law was much more special than any of them, and if he had Law as his friend he didn't need anyone else. "I don't care for them, I like you more," he told Law while he was watching him with a surprised expression on his face. It was the first time anyone had said he liked the boy, aside from his parents and his sister. "I like you too," Law said, and Luffy stopped running to turn around and look at the boy, a big smile on his face. Listening to Law saying that he liked him made him feel really happy, in a way he had never felt before. Waving his arms to the boy he said bye to him, running back to his house, eager for the next day to come, and to see Law once again. But little he knew that this day would never come. During the night he woke up, hearing loud noises of sirens, and people talking loudly, making him wonder what had happened. Curious, he got up from his bed, heading toward the front door, which was open. There he saw Dayton and several other neighbors chatting in the street, and even more curious than before, he asked what had happened. Saying it was a matter of adults, Dayton caught him by his shirt to take him back inside, but when he heard the name of his friend's family being told by several people, he immediately realized that something was very wrong. Biting Dayton's hand, he escaped from her, and ran through neighborhood streets, passing through several people until he reached the house where his friend lived, there seeing the worst of the possible visions. The house he would visit every day was on fire, surrounded by fire trucks, their sirens nearly leaving him deaf. He started to yell for Law, trying to move forward among all those uniformed men and curious people, but was stopped before he could go further. "Toro, are you there? Answer me." Luffy continued to scream while a man he had never seen in his life carried him away, preventing him from finding his friend. He shook himself, trying in every way to escape from him, but not succeeding. And with each passing moment he found himself farther to find Law, as well farther to find answers to what had happened. Answers that would come a few days later, due to his insistence on knowing what had happened. Law's parents were killed, along with his sister. And as for Law, the only survivor of that sad incident, no one knew where he was. He just disappeared. Knowing this, Luffy cried, not only because he would never see those people who were so nice to him again, but also because he couldn't stop thinking about how much Law was suffering. The boy that was lonely before, now was completely alone in this world, and he couldn't even see him, and try to do something for him. But even if he couldn't see him now, he wouldn't give up on finding him in the future. And from that day on, something has become a routine for Luffy. Every day he spent a great part of his day in front of that house, where he used to spend his days beside his friend, or what was left of it, hoping his friend would show up somewhere, sometime. But time passed, and in the end this never happened. And after years and years waiting for any sign of life from Law, Luffy finally found himself giving up, believing he would never see his friend again. And so the years passed. "I'm bored." Luffy looks at his cell phone, noticing that hours had passed ever since he arrived at that place. Hospitals, he hated them. Losing count of how much time he had spent on them lately, he thought he would be free of them, ever since he traveled away from home to spend some time with his brother Sabo. But judging by the situation he found himself now, he was mistaken. Here he was, inside one of them once again, where he was literally dragged by his brother. He knew he had to take care of himself, since he still wasn't fully recovered from the incident that had taken place weeks ago, but he didn't want to be there. This place brought the worst possible memories of the boy. It was in one of them that he ended up spending a great part of his days lately, that he stayed in a coma for days, and almost died, that he felt the deepest despair when he learned about the death of his brother, Ace. That alone was enough for him to never even want to pass in front of one of them. Closing his eyes, the memories of that day began to come back to his mind. He still could hear the deafening sound of the shots, of the desperate cries. He could still smell blood, and see his hands soaked with it. He could still remember the last words his brother said to him, before he left his life forever. These were things he would never forget, memories that were embedded in his mind for the rest of his life. Shaking his head, Luffy tried to dispel these thoughts from his mind, focusing on what was happening around him. Among the various people he could see in front of him, one caught his attention. A tall man, who by the way he was dressed was a doctor of that place, but didn't look much like one. His hands were partially covered with tattoos, which also seemed to cover a part of his arms, and his hair was pretty messy. He was surrounded by some weird people, including a man with a strange hat that looked like the head of a penguin. While they talked, he could vaguely hear what was being said, but couldn't understand much, since he didn't know anything about these medical terms which they were talking about. Understood. Leave it to me, Doctor. The man with the penguin hat paused, looking at the other man's clothes, apparently looking for his name. Trafalgar Law. The other man completed, saying his name. And in that moment, Luffy feels everything stopping around him. That name he recognized. His mind then turned to the past, more exactly to his childhood, in the days when he still lived with his adoptive mother dating. In the times when he met the lonely boy who lived nearby him, with whom he made a strong friendship, and whom he hadn't seen for years, not even knowing if he was still alive. The name of that boy, and this man in front of him were the same. Could it be possible that they were the same person? Without thinking twice, Luffy got up from the seat that he occupied for some time, and ran after the man, who had just left the hospital. Hey. Wait. He called to the man, trying to get his attention, but not succeeding because he didn't even stop to see who was calling him. But Luffy wouldn't give up so easily. Continuing to follow the man, he grabbed his arm as he reached him, preventing him from continuing to walk. The doctor turned immediately to see who had stopped him, casting an angry and intimidating look, but Luffy didn't feel bothered with it. He was too busy observing the man's face, trying to find any trace in common with the boy he had known in his childhood. Something that wasn't too hard to find. Take your hands off my arm now. The familiar man said to Luffy, angrier than ever, but he didn't even hear what was being said to him. He was too surprised to pay attention to anything now. Why you I know you, Luffy says, a smile starting to appear on his face, now convinced that this man who was in front of him really was his childhood friend, whom he had sought for so long. Really? Well, I don't know you, so take your hands off me. Law said, still angry, not having any idea of where that boy knew him, and not interested in knowing as well. Don't you remember me? We played together when we were kids. Luffy insisted, trying to get Law to remember him. It was only then, when the boy mentioned his childhood, that he began to think about who that boy could be. He was surprised when the boy said that he played with him, when in his childhood he had a disease that made everyone discriminate against him and stay away from him. Well, everyone, but one person. A boy full of energy that once appeared out of nowhere in his house, and insisted so much for him to let him come into his life. A boy who had very similar features with this boy, and that had the same bright smile which he could never forget. I'm Luffy. Do you remember me, Torao? It was then that Law's mind cleared like never before. There was only one person in his life who had called him for that strange nickname. It was exactly a boy who was called Luffy. I remember you. The doctor said, and Luffy smiled like he never smiled before, genuinely glad to see that Law still remembered him, even after all these years. I can't believe it. I thought I'd never see you again, Torao. Shishishi. Luffy practically jumped on the man, putting his arms around him, and hugging him tightly, surprising Law. The man felt really uncomfortable, since he didn't like to be touched by anyone, even if it was for someone who was already part of his life, or at least was in the past. He didn't like to be close to anyone. It doesn't matter who it was, or at least this was the image that he liked to pass to other people. Yes, this is certainly a surprise. Law gave a small smile, which immediately disappeared when he pushed the boy away from him in a not very gentle way. Luffy looked at him, not understanding what happened, as the man took a few steps back. When Luffy looked at the man's face, he couldn't help but notice how the expression on Law's face was contrasting with his own. While Luffy had a big smile on his face, clearly happy to see his friend again, Law continued inexpressively, showing no sign that he was at least a little happy to see him. And that was bothering him. Well, it was nice to see you again, Luffy, but I have to go now. Excuse me. Law said, quickly walking through Luffy without saying another word. What? Where are you going? We just started talking. Luffy said, looking at the man, who was already far away from him, feeling a little disappointed. There were so many things he wanted to talk to him, so much that he wanted to ask, but the other man didn't seem interested in talking to him. I see nothing for us to talk about, Luffy. Law replied coldly, not even looking at the boy who was left behind, while Luffy watched him in silence as he entered the hospital once again. Luffy couldn't understand why the man was acting like that. When he recognized him, he thought that Law would feel the same joy he felt when he saw his friend, whom he hadn't seen for years, but he was wrong. He didn't recognize that person anymore, who seemed to have changed so much over the years. He was cold and distant, and he saw an emptiness in his eyes, something that was really bothering him. But to Luffy it didn't matter how much the man had changed. He was still the person that he searched for all these years. He was still his friend, even if the other doesn't think about him in the same way, and he wouldn't give up on that person he wanted so badly to encounter for so long. Luffy would keep insisting, until the day he could find a patch to his heart and life again. No matter how much time it would take for him to find it. I feel tired. Law opens the door and enters his apartment, feeling tiredness taking over his body and his mind. He had decided to return home earlier, not being able to stay focused on work, all because of a certain person that reappeared in his life a few hours ago. Luffy, as much as he wanted to deny, he had never forgotten that boy, who meant so much to him in his childhood. When everyone stayed away from him in fear of a rumor that wasn't true, Luffy was the one who had the courage to approach him. He understood the loneliness that Law felt, and always stood by his side, not caring if everyone would distance themselves from him because of that. He really was a very special person. If it was a while ago, he would be really happy to encounter the boy, and would love to recover all the time they have lost in these years they had been away from each other. But not now. Not when he had already decided to never have anyone special in his life again. Giving a sigh, Law enters his bedroom, and without even changing clothes, lays down on his bed, his mind being filled with painful thoughts and memories. Memories of how everything that he loved most was taken away from him in the worst ways possible. His parents, his little sister, who adored him so much, and also the person who saved his life, the person that had taken him away from the most desperate situation, and gave him a new chance to live. Poor San, he felt a sharp pain in his chest as he remembered that man. Remembering him, thinking about how much he loved him to the point of sacrificing his life to save his own, still caused a great pain to him, even if many years had already passed. That person was the light of his life, but someone took him away, leaving him in complete darkness. It was from that day on that Law decided to completely close himself to the world. He had no desire to let anyone else get close to him, not wanting to suffer or to lose anything that was important to him again. Not that anyone had ever tried to approach him. Perhaps realizing that he had no desire to socialize with anyone, or afraid of his apparent insensitivity, and sometimes rude behavior, everyone kept their distance from him. This at least until the present day, when that boy from his past appeared in his life again. Insisting on following him, talking to him, invading his personal space, he was the first person shown to have some interest in him in a long time. It was like what happened in his childhood was happening once again. Encountering Luffy really surprised him, and he was honestly glad to see him again, but he decided that it would be better not to show it, hiding it behind a mask of indifference. Hiding his feelings was something that he became really good at over the years. He wanted to sit down and talk with him, to know what happened after all these years that had passed, to be close to his friend once again, but he just couldn't do it. He wanted him in his life again, but in the end he pushed him away. Despite the seemingly cold and distant person he had become, and even not really liking to admit, he felt really lonely. Even though he decided not to have anyone else in his life, he missed having someone by his side, someone to share his life and his feelings. But his traumas didn't allow him to have anyone else in his life. Tired of thinking of so many depressing things, he closed his eyes, trying to fall asleep. He knew that he needed to sleep, something that he has barely been able to do lately, but what was already difficult before became an even more difficult task now, since he couldn't stop thinking about a certain boy, and that bright smile of his, something that he had never forgotten in all these years that had passed. Sabo. Luffy enters the house he was living in with his brother hastily. He wanted to tell him what had happened, and maybe ask for some advice, but when he saw that he had fallen asleep, probably waiting for him to come home, he decided not to bother him. Instead, he just sat down next to him in silence, lost in his thoughts. He couldn't stop thinking about Law and his encounter with him. Even though this encounter wasn't very pleasant, he was very happy to find his childhood friend again, to know that he was alive, and well, even if the other man didn't seem to share the same happiness as he understood that the distance and the time could change the way that man saw him, and felt for him, so he could understand the rather cold reaction that Law had. But still, there was something that bothered him. The man was different from the person he had known as a child, and it wasn't because of his appearance. Taking the irritation that he was feeling at times, and which by the way was clearly visible, he couldn't see anything. His face was inexpressive most of the time, and Luffy could see the emptiness in his eyes, something that bothered him a lot. Luffy knew that was probably due to the trauma he suffered when he lost his family in that terrible incident that happened years ago. Anyone would change after going through something like that. That made him really worried about Law, but he decided not to think about it too much, since he couldn't do anything about it now, and focus on what he would do when they see each other again, and what he would do to get close to the man. Luffy didn't know what to do, and what would happen when he saw the man again, but he could feel happiness growing inside of him, and a smile appeared on his face, thinking that he would see the man again. He fell asleep with that smile on his face, as memories of his childhood alongside Law occupied his mind. Memories of how much he liked, and still liked that man, even after so much time has passed. And how much this person was, and still is, so special to him. Good morning, Toro. Luffy looked at the man in front of him, greeting him in a very warm way, and with a big smile on his face, only to be ignored again, since Law passed by his side without even looking at him. With a sigh, he just followed the man with his eyes until he disappeared from his sight. It already became a routine for Luffy in the past days. He always tried to talk to the man, only to be ignored or to be interrupted by someone, so he didn't feel so bothered or unmotivated anymore. He was already used to it. He sat on his bench nearby him, remembering all the days that he had tried to approach Law, but without success. Luffy had found Law for the first time in years the day before, trying to approach him, but not being able to because the man didn't seem interested in even talking to him. But today was a new day, and he was confident that he would be able to get his attention. Waking early, he made his way to the hospital, waiting for a certain person to appear in front of him, something which didn't take too long to happen, since that was his workplace. Running up to him, and stopping in front of him, he gave a big smile, glad to see the man again. "Good morning, Toro." Luffy greets him excitedly, while the man looked at him with the same indifference from the previous day. "You again, Luffy? I thought you got the message yesterday." "I didn't get the message, and I don't want to." "Don't think that I'll give up on you, because I won't," Luffy says, feeling confident, prepared to insist on the time it took to get a space in the surgeon's life. "Do whatever you want," Law said coldly, passing through Luffy without saying another word, leaving the boy behind as well as he did on the day before. "Today is a good day, a great day, and everything will work out." Luffy repeated it again and again as he watched a certain man from a safe distance, waiting for him to be alone to approach him. When everyone left, he ran toward the man, hoping to be able to talk to him, but at that same time the man with the penguin hat came in his way. "Doctor, it is an emergency. Let's go," he said, running into the hospital, being followed by Law, while Luffy just watched them, feeling disappointed. Today was not a good day, and nothing worked. Luffy sat on a bench in the waiting room of the hospital, wearing a cap instead of his already known straw hat, hoping Law wouldn't recognize him. In the last 2 days the man had managed to avoid him, running away as soon as he could see, but today he would get the man by surprise. Waiting patiently until the moment when the man passed through him, he got up to follow him, but when he was about to grab him by his shoulder, he could feel someone pulling him back. "Trying to run away again, Sir Luffy? Your brother had warned me to keep an eye on you, so be nice, and go into the doctor's room right now." He heard a woman speaking angrily to him, dragging him into the doctor's room, and practically throwing him inside of it, not letting him get in contact with Law. And once again he had failed in approaching the man. "Today everything will work out. I know it will." Luffy kept repeating that phrase again and again in his mind, while waiting for the doctor to leave his work. It was already night, and Law hadn't yet left the hospital, and Luffy gets impressed by the amount of hours he worked by day. It was as if he had no life beyond work. After a long time of waiting, the man finally passed through the front door of the hospital, and Luffy gave a small smile when he saw him. Raising from the bench where he sat for hours, he gave a step towards the doctor, but was unable to give the second, since someone had grabbed his shirt. "So you are here, Luffy. Do you know what time it is?" Luffy immediately recognized that voice. It was his brother Sabo. He was so distracted by his thoughts that he had forgotten to tell his brother where he was, which apparently had left him very angry. "Wait, Sabo, just a minute." I was almost Luffy started trying to convince his brother to wait, but was interrupted by him. "Not even another minute. We're going home now." The older brother then grabs the younger by his shirt, dragging him away from there. As Sabo wait, Saburo. And so he was once again dragged away from Law before he could talk to him. Luffy shakes his head, bringing his thoughts back to the present. He had tried every way he could think to approach the man, but not succeeding in any of them. If trying to approach the man in simple ways, like he had been doing in the last days, wasn't working, he would have to try something different. And it was then that an idea came to his mind. "Luffy, you getting too obsessed with this man." Luffy closes his eyes, remembering the words that his brother Sabo told him when he told him about his new plan on how to approach Law. Sabo didn't like the idea, and disagreed with the plan, but that was nothing that would stop Luffy from getting what he wanted. Since Law wouldn't let the boy come into his life in the easy way, he was going to try the hard way. It was with this thought that he put his plan into action. Determined to find anything that would help him to get into the man's life and heart, he began to follow him every day, looking for something he could use to approach him, whatever it was. But after watching him for a few days, he realized that it wouldn't be something easy to find. Every day was the same, nothing changed in Law's routine. He went from home to work, from work to home. It was simple like that. He was always alone, never going out to have fun, seemed to remain in his place of work as much as he could, and only came home to sleep, which seemed he wasn't able to do for some time, since he had huge dark circles under his eyes. And this strict routine that the man was following daily made discovering something different about him into something somewhat difficult. But Luffy didn't give up, and continued to follow the man day after day, waiting for something to change in his strict routine. Something that finally happened on this day. For some reason, Law had left the hospital earlier, something that had never happened in the days when Luffy was watching him, and the boy saw this as a good sign. Perhaps this was the chance he was waiting to discover something new about Law. "Today I will discover something new, I know I will." The boy thought optimistically, then followed the man in the most discreet way possible. Luffy noticed that the man was following a very different path from before, which meant he wasn't going home. Along the way, he saw him entering a place that looked like a floriculture, there buying the most beautiful flowers he could see, without worrying about the price. This attitude made Luffy think that man was going to a date or something like that, and that those flowers he would give to this mysterious person with whom he would meet. Luffy couldn't understand why, but he didn't like the idea of Law having a date with someone. That meant that someone had managed to get the surgeon's attention, something that he couldn't do after all the days he was struggling to get it. And to think that Law had someone special in his life made him feel weird. Am I jealous? He asked himself, not knowing exactly what was making him feel so angry. Lost in his thoughts, he hadn't even noticed when the man had left the place, only seeing him when he had almost lost sight of him. Deciding that now wasn't the time to think about those things, he got up and continued to follow Law, who continued to walk until he entered a cemetery, something that Luffy found very strange. People don't usually have dates in cemeteries, right? He continued to watch the man as he walked among the graves for a few moments, until he stopped in front of a specific one, crouching in front of it, and leaving above it the flowers he had just bought. At that moment the boy realized that he was wrong in thinking that the Law was going for a date, feeling foolish for being so angry because of something that wouldn't even happen. More curious than ever, Luffy came closer to where the man was, watching him with all his attention. Law then sat in front of the mysterious grave, a gentle smile appearing on his face, something that surprised Luffy. He hardly believed what he was seeing. In all those days when he was following Law, this was the first time that the boy saw him leaving his insensitive and indifferent facade and showing some kind of emotion. Seeing this, Luffy smiled in satisfaction. He really was right in thinking that he would see something new about the man that day. The boy then heard Law's voice, as he spoke in front of the grave. Acting as if he was talking to a good friend, the man began to say all kinds of things. How he spends his days, the things that had happened, and in the middle of all these things, something that surprised Luffy. Poor San, do you remember that boy which I told you that was the only friend that I had ever had? He appeared in front of me a few days ago, Law said, and Luffy didn't have to stop to think to know who the man was talking about. He was talking about him. More surprised than ever, he approached a little more of where the man was, trying to hear more clearly what was being said, even if it was somewhat risky, and if he wasn't careful, he could easily be seen by the man. He hasn't changed a bit since the last time I saw him. He's still the same fool he was before. Fool enough to try to get close to me day after day, even though I repeatedly ignored him or said harsh words to him. I can't understand why Idiot Law continued, and Luffy began to remember once again all of his failed attempts in trying to approach the man, and how he had failed in every single one of them. But that didn't really matter now, so he went back to focusing on what Law was saying. And I can't understand myself either. I don't understand why he, and his annoying insistence in approaching me had moved me so much. It's as if the past was repeating itself again. Law continued, and with that, Luffy was surprised beyond words. For all those days he had thought that all of his efforts in approaching the man had been in vain, but at that moment he realized that this wasn't the case. He had managed to awaken something in Law, and this was something that only strengthened his determination in getting a place into man's life again. But even if I feel like that, I can't. Law then begin to whisper, something that prevented Luffy from hearing the rest of what he was saying, only getting to see his lips moving as he said something the boy couldn't understand. Feeling frustrated at losing something that was probably important, he tried to approach even more of the man, even being in a position that was already too risky. Getting closer to the man step by step, he was approaching Law without him realizing it, at least until he bumped into something. Something that made a great noise, and called the surgeon's attention, exactly what he didn't want to happen. Before he knew, Law was looking directly at him, a look of surprise on his face, that in seconds turned into an annoyance, making Luffy take a few steps back. What are you doing here? Law asked with a threatening tone in his voice, something that made Luffy want to hide anywhere that was far from man's vision. Damn, if I weren't so clumsy, this wouldn't be happening. Luffy started talking, trying to find some excuse to be there without telling the truth, as it could end his chances of approaching the man. I was passing by, and then I saw you, then I decided to tell you hi. Shishishi. The boy then added, giving a forced laugh that probably didn't help in convincing Law. And staying hidden listening to what I was saying was part of me saying hi too. Law asked, even more irritated, ignoring Luffy's explanation, since it was more than obvious that they were nothing more than a lie. The boy had always been a terrible liar, ever since when they were kids, and he knew that very well. You were following me, weren't you? Luffy was silent for a while, realizing that Law wouldn't believe any lie he could say. Not knowing what else to say to justify his presence there, since lying wasn't really his forte, he then decided that to be honest, and tell the truth to the man would be the best, even already expecting an unfriendly reaction from him. Why yes, I was following you. Luffy confessed to the man, looking at him, that's still watching him with a really irritated look. You gave me no choice. I couldn't get close to you, since you always seem to be avoiding me, so I've decided to follow you in silence, and find something that I could use to get closer to you. Luffy completed, ending confessing all his plans for the man, who just kept watching him in silence, looking a little surprised, and obviously angry. Law didn't like when people tried to invade his privacy in any way, that was something that irritated him a lot, but there was something that softened his anger at that moment, the surprise he felt at seeing that Luffy hadn't yet given up, and all the effort he was making to approach him. He really couldn't understand him. He was always treating him badly, ignoring or avoiding him in every possible way, thus showing that he wanted nothing to do with the boy, but he still refused to give up, trying in every way to get his attention. I don't understand why you insist so much. Haven't you realized that I don't want to see you, and I don't want anything to do with you? Law said, the expression on his face changing to a calmer one, something that surprised Luffy. He thought the man would get even angrier with him, shouting or even offending him in any way, but that's not what happened. Isn't it obvious? I insist so much because I like you. You are my friend. Luffy said honestly what he felt, surprising the man once more. He couldn't understand why Luffy had so much consideration for him as he hadn't seen him for years, and why he still has seen him as a friend, even when he treated him so badly. None of it made sense to him, but the words that Luffy told really moved him somehow, and he could feel a strange feeling growing inside of him. But of course he would never show that to the boy, and once again would pretend to be indifferent to him, and everything that he had said. Friend? Like me? Don't talk nonsense, we really were friends in our childhood, but this is something that's in the past. Law said coldly to Luffy, hiding his true thoughts and feelings behind an apparent indifference. This is something that doesn't matter to me. You're lying. Luffy said, not believing in what the man had told him. It didn't make any sense after all that he had heard Law confess in front of that mysterious grave, so he couldn't believe what he said now was true. He wouldn't let those words affect him. Lying? Where am I lying, Luffy? He asks, confused at first, not knowing what Luffy was talking about, but then he remembered that he was being watched for some time by the boy, who probably heard everything that was being said by him, even the things he didn't want him to know. So it was kind of obvious that Luffy wouldn't easily believe in the lies he was telling. You say you want nothing to do with me, that our friendship doesn't matter to you, but I heard what you said just now. Luffy said to the man, confirming his suspicions. You said that me, and all my insistence in approaching you really moved you, and you also never forgot the past. You must feel the same way as I feel then. Luffy said confidently, glad to have heard at least a part of what the man had said, something he could use against what the Law was saying now, something that he really believed that were only lies. I've only said those things for saying, they mean nothing, Law whispered, feeling tired of arguing with the boy. Not wanting to prolong this uncomfortable situation in which he was placed, and not wanting to give more openings for Luffy to try to approach him, he stepped forward, starting to walk, passing through Luffy without saying another word. But before he could move on Luffy, he grabbed him by his arm, not letting him give another step forward. I won't let you go now. I've spent years looking for you, you know, and I'm not giving up on you now that I found you. Luffy then said, looking at the man's back. He was tired of always being left behind by the surgeon, and wouldn't let it happen again today. Not now that he seemed to be so close to being able to get something from him. Not now that he knew his efforts and insistence in approaching him were not in vain. He would keep insisting until he got what he wanted. Why wouldn't you let me get closer to you? I don't understand, is it asking too much to get a little of your attention? Luffy says, not caring if it looked like he was begging for the man's attention. He really couldn't understand why Law was so reluctant to let him get close to him, as he himself had admitted that his efforts in approaching the man had moved him so much. He couldn't understand why he had become such a distant and sad person over the years. Even knowing what had happened to his family, he felt there was one more reason for this change, and he had the feeling that the answer to that was that mysterious grave that Law had visited today. Law remained silent, not knowing what else to do with the situation. He had tried all ways to get out of it, hoping that Luffy would just give up, but deep down he knew that the boy would never give up until he got what he wanted, and tired of all that, he decided it would be better to give to Luffy what he wished. Give a bit of the attention that he so desperately wanted. He thought there was no problem, since it would be something he would do just for a day. He would only go out with Luffy one day, hoping that like this he would stop following him to every corner, and insisting to get something from him. That didn't mean he would actually approach the boy, or create any kind of attachment to him. It would be just a casual meeting, nothing else. Something that would only be for a day. Alright, you win. Law said, finally giving up, and Luffy raised his head to look at him, obviously surprised. If you want to go out to talk that much, I can see a day when I have time. Oh really? Are you serious? For real? Luffy asked him incredulously. He could hardly believe that Law had finally agreed to go out with him to talk after so many no's, after so many days of insistence without success. Of course, do you think that I'm lying? Law questions, and Luffy immediately shakes his head, not wanting the man to think wrong. No, it's not that. I'm just a little surprised. Luffy says to the man, feeling really surprised, and glad he decided to accept his invitation, and go out with him. That was a good sign, a sign that he was finally getting to break the man's reluctance in approaching him. Thank you, Toro. You should thank your annoying insistence, Luffy, not me. Law though honestly. If it were not for Luffy's annoying insistence, he would never have accepted going out with him. We will see one day, then, you know where to find me. Goodbye. Law said goodbye quickly, leaving the place, and Luffy behind, somewhat relieved that the boy wasn't following him or trying to stop him. He didn't have to look to Luffy to know the expression that he had on his face. He knew in his face, he would have that brilliant smile that he would always wear when he was happy, and for some reason thinking in that smile, made a small smile appeared on his face as well. As much as he tried to fight what he was feeling, he couldn't help feeling that little feeling of happiness that was growing inside of him, and seeing how much Luffy genuinely liked him, even if it was something that didn't make much sense, since he had been treating him in a not very friendly way lately. The boy really considered him a friend. It had been a long time since the last time someone had so much consideration for him, and this made him feel strange. Meanwhile, Luffy remained standing where he was, the biggest of smiles on his face, as he watched the man until he could no longer see him. Then he turned his attention, and his gaze to the grave that was next to him, in which Law had placed those flowers he had bought on his way there. Walking over to it, he bent down, watching it closely. Then quick at Rosinante, Luffy read the scriptures in the grave in front of him, his curiosity to know what that person was to Law increasing more and more with each passing second. It was clear that this mysterious person meant a lot to the man, judging by the way he was acting in front of this grave. And maybe that person was the key for him to know why Law had changed so much over the years. But this was something that he decided not to worry about for now, as this was something he would only find out with time, and if he could get closer to Law. He knew it wouldn't be easy, since the man really had closed himself to the world, but he had managed to take the first step, and for now this was enough for him. With time, he knew he would get Law to open his heart to him. Thanks for watching my video, see you next time, till then sayonara.